The first bullet took Sergeant Daniels through the chest before the crack of the rifle even registered. He staggered backward into the moss-covered rocks, eyes wide with shock, blood spreading across his tactical vest like spilled wine. Lieutenant Lydia Carter watched him fall and understood in that instant they'd walked into a kill box hidden in the forest canopy. Contact! Trees, multiple positions. Staff Sergeant Brooks's warning was cut short by the second shot, which punched through his helmet with a sound like a hammer hitting steel. He dropped without a sound, dead before his body hit the forest floor, carpeted with wet leaves. Then the forest exploded. Rounds cracked through branches, shredded bark, sent splinters flying like shrapnel. The SEAL team scattered, diving behind trees that offered cover too thin, into depressions too shallow, desperate for anything that might stop bullets that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We're surrounded. They've got us zeroed from the high ground. Lydia pressed herself flat against a massive pine, listening to rounds impact all around her position. 10 different firing positions, maybe more. Enemy snipers embedded in the forest like ghosts, invisible in the canopy, picking off her teammates with surgical precision while her people died in the undergrowth. Then she remembered the rifle case strapped to her back, the one she'd carried for 6 months without opening, the one she'd sworn she'd never need again. Her hands moved to the straps before her conscious mind even made the decision. What happened in the next 23 minutes would turn a massacre into a legend. How one woman transformed from observer into the most dangerous predator the forest had ever seen. How she hunted the hunters through terrain that should have made it impossible. But before we show you how she did it, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and smash that subscribe button. Because this story will change everything you think you know about who the real warriors are. Now let's get into it. The mission had started 48 hours earlier in a forward operating base carved into the mountainside, surrounded by dense forest that stretched for miles in every direction. Captain Jake Morrison had gathered his SEAL team in the operations tent, a canvas structure that smelled of gun oil and strong coffee, its walls covered with topographic maps and satellite imagery. "Gentlemen," Morrison said, tapping a red circle on the map, "our target is a weapons depot approximately 12 kilometers into the forest. Intelligence suggests this is where they're storing the anti-aircraft missiles that have been hitting our helicopters. We go in, we confirm the presence of the weapons. We call in the airstrike. We get out simple." "Since when is anything in this forest simple?" Petty Officer Martinez muttered, studying the terrain with the wariness of someone who'd spent 3 tours, learning that forests could kill you just as dead as bullets. "Since we've got excellent intel and surprise on our side," Morrison replied. "They don't know we're coming. We move fast, stay quiet, accomplish the mission before they even know we're in the area." That's when Lieutenant Lydia Carter walked into the tent, and every head turned. She looked exactly like what her paperwork said she was. An intelligence analyst attached to the team for field assessment mid-30s, athletic build hidden under loose-fitting tactical gear, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. She carried a tablet and a rifle case, the universal accessories of support personnel pretending to be tactical. "This is Lieutenant Carter," Morrison said. "She'll be accompanying us to assess the intelligence gathering process in forest operations. She stays in the rear with communications, observes, files her reports." "Everyone clear?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," echoed through the tent, though several SEALs exchanged glances that clearly said great, another desk jockey to babysit. What none of them knew, what none of them were cleared to know, was that Lydia Carter's intelligence file had more classified sections than readable text, that she'd spent 4 years with a unit that didn't officially exist, operating in forests and jungles across 3 continents, that her official designation had been Strategic Asset for Denied Environment Operations, which was military speak for person who goes places we can't admit we go and does things we can't admit happen, that she'd been one of the deadliest forest warfare specialists the U.S. military had ever produced, with 38 confirmed eliminations in terrain just like this, before she'd walked away from it and tried to be something else, someone else. The team moved out at 3 o'clock hours, 12 SEALs plus Carter, slipping into the forest under cover of darkness. The trees swallowed them immediately, massive pines and oaks that had been growing for centuries, their canopy so dense it blocked out the stars, reducing visibility to whatever their night vision could provide. They moved in tactical formation, Martinez on point with his enhanced optics, Morrison commanding from the center, Carter bringing up the rear with the communications specialist. Professional, quiet, efficient. The forest was alive with sounds, wind through branches, distant animal calls, the occasional crack of a limb, but nothing that suggested human presence. For the first 6 hours, everything went according to plan. They covered ground quickly, avoided the few trails where they might be spotted, navigated by GPS through terrain that tried to confuse their sense of direction. By sunrise, they'd made it 8 kilometers into the forest without incident. "Too easy," Martinez whispered over the radio. "This feels wrong." "Stay alert," Morrison replied. "We're 2 hours from the target zone." That's when the forest changed. The bird calls stopped. The normal ambient noise faded to unsettling silence. Every seal felt it, the primitive warning that prey gets when predators are near. Martinez raised his fist, signaling halt. The team froze, weapons ready, eyes scanning the canopy where morning light filtered through leaves and shafts that created more shadows than illumination. "Movement," Martinez breathed. "High, 11 o'clock, maybe 50 meters. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him into a pile of wet leaves. Before anyone could react, the second shot killed Brooks, the third wounded Daniels, the fourth took out their radio man. The ambush was perfect. Enemy snipers had been waiting in elevated positions throughout the canopy, using the forest itself as camouflage, firing from platforms built into massive trees that gave them both height advantage and concealment. The SEALs scattered for cover, but cover was relative in a forest where bullets came from above. "Canopy! They're in the trees!" Morrison shouted, pressing himself behind an oak that immediately began taking fire. "Count at least 6 positions, maybe more." Lydia dove behind a fallen log, her analyst brain already cataloging firing positions by sound and impact patterns. Northwest ridge, 40 meters up. Southeast cluster, multiple shooters. West flank, single precision shooter. East approach, coordinated fire team. They weren't just good. They were trained, disciplined, using forest warfare techniques that took years to master. Techniques she'd taught to Allied forces in 3 different countries before she'd walked away from that life. "We're pinned," Petty Officer Chen called out. "Can't get clean shots. They're too high and too well concealed." Morrison tried to coordinate return fire, but every time someone exposed themselves to shoot upward, multiple enemy positions engaged simultaneously. The forest canopy was perfect for this. Dense enough to hide shooters, open enough for them to have clear shots downward, creating a 3-dimensional kill box that conventional tactics couldn't solve. "Air support," Morrison ordered. "Get me close air support now." "Radio's destroyed, sir," someone yelled back. "They took out comms first shot." That's when Lydia made her decision. She'd carried that rifle case for 6 months without opening it, tried to convince herself she was done being what she used to be. But watching SEALs die in a forest kill box, she understood better than they ever could. She realized some skills you couldn't walk away from, not when good people needed them. Her hands moved to the case strapped to her back, muscle memory taking over. The locks opened with familiar clicks. Inside was a custom Remington MSR in .338 Lapua Magnum, modified for forest operations with a suppressor designed for dispersing sound through trees. The rifle had been her companion through 4 years of operations in environments just like this one. She assembled it with practiced efficiency, stock, barrel, scope, magazine, movement so smooth they looked choreographed. Around her, SEALs were dying or bleeding, or desperately trying to return fire at targets they couldn't see. "Carter, what the hell are you doing?" Morrison shouted from behind his tree. "Stay down." She didn't answer. Instead, she moved. The SEALs watched in confusion as the intelligence analyst they'd been babysitting suddenly transformed into something else entirely. She flowed through the forest like she'd been born in it, reading terrain with instincts that went beyond training. Every step landed on solid ground that made no sound. Every movement used trees and shadows for concealment. Every position she chose gave her angles that shouldn't have existed. She found a spot behind a cluster of moss-covered rocks that offered a narrow sight line up through the canopy. Through her scope, the forest resolved into layers: ground level where her teammates died, middle canopy where branches created false targets, upper canopy where enemy snipers thought they were safe. She saw the first one immediately 40 meters up in a massive pine, camouflaged so well most people would have missed him entirely. But Lydia had spent 4 years learning to see what forests tried to hide. She saw the unnatural symmetry of his hide position, the slight movement as he shifted weight, the barrel of his rifle creating a line that didn't belong in nature's chaos. She calculated the shot in seconds. Distance, 42 meters. Elevation angle, 63 degrees. Wind, negligible beneath the canopy. Target movement, minimal. She controlled her breathing, let her heartbeat slow to 55 beats per minute, and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle made a sound like a thick branch breaking. The enemy sniper fell from his position, crashing through branches, dead before he hit the ground. "What the?" Chen started to say, but Carter was already moving. She relocated 15 meters to a new position, found her next target, a shooter in an oak tree to the southeast who was drawing a bead on Morrison 2 shots. First, took him in the chest. Second was insurance. He fell, his rifle clattering through branches. "Carter's engaging!" Martinez yelled, pressing a field dressing to his wounded shoulder. "Holy shit, she's actually engaging!" Morrison watched through his scope as the analyst, who wasn't an analyst, moved through the forest like a ghost. She didn't fight the terrain, she used it. Every tree that provided her cover, every shadow that concealed her movement, every angle that gave her shots at targets she shouldn't have been able to see. This wasn't luck. This was expertise that went far beyond anything taught in basic training. The third enemy sniper made the mistake of trying to relocate. He moved along a branch, trying to get a better angle on the seals below, and Carter caught the movement. Her bullet found him mid-step, and he fell 40 feet through the canopy. "She's hunting them," Daniels whispered, watching Carter work. "She's actually hunting them like they're prey, and she's the predator." The fourth and fifth snipers were positioned together, using mutual support to cover each other's blind spots, professional work. Carter shot the spotter first. Always eliminate the spotter. Force the shooter to make decisions alone. Then, she waited with predator patience for the shooter to break cover to check on his partner. When he did, her bullet was already in flight. Morrison keyed his radio. "Carter, what the hell are you?" Her voice came back calm, professional. "Someone who knows these forests better than they do. Stay in cover. I'm going to flank the western positions." "Flank? How are you going to—" But she was already moving, and what Morrison saw defied everything he thought he knew about forest combat. She climbed. Not the fumbling, noisy climb of someone uncomfortable with heights, but the smooth, confident movement of someone who'd spent hundreds of hours in forest canopies. She went up a massive pine, like she had suction cups on her hands and feet, using branches that looked too thin to support her weight, but somehow held. Within 2 minutes, she was 30 meters up, moving through the canopy like it was solid ground. The seals below could barely track her movement, just glimpses of tactical gear flashing between leaves, the occasional sound of a branch flexing under her weight. She found the Western sniper team's position and understood immediately why they'd been so effective. 3 shooters in a cluster of oaks, using interlocking fields of fire that covered every approach from the ground. They'd built a platform between trees that gave them stability and concealment professional work, but they'd made one mistake. They were watching the ground, not the canopy behind them. Carter moved until she was level with their position, 20 meters away, concealed behind pine needles and branches. Through her scope, she could see them clearly, one watching through binoculars, one scanning with his rifle, one preparing to reposition. They spoke quietly to each other in a language she recognized but wouldn't reveal. She understood. She took the shot caller first, one suppressed round. He slumped over his platform. His partners reacted with trained efficiency, spinning to find the threat, but they were looking in the wrong direction. Carter had already moved 5 meters along a thick branch, finding a new angle. Second shot, second shooter down. The third one finally spotted her. She saw his eyes go wide as he realized the hunter had become the hunted. He tried to bring his rifle around, but he was too slow. Carter's bullet found him before he could fire. 3 more enemy snipers eliminated. The forest was starting to shift from killbox to hunting ground, and the prey wasn't the seals anymore. Jesus Christ, Martinez breathed, watching Carter descend from the canopy with the same fluid grace she'd shown climbing up. That's not normal. That's not even close to normal. Morrison had to agree. He'd worked with Marine snipers, Army Rangers, Delta Force operators. He'd never seen anything like what he was watching now. Carter moved through the forest like she was part of it, like the trees themselves were helping her, showing her where to go and where to shoot. The remaining enemy snipers were getting nervous. Carter could tell by their behavior patterns, faster movements, less discipline, shots fired without proper target acquisition. Fear was spreading through their ranks as they realized they were being systematically hunted by someone better than them. The 7th sniper tried to escape. Climbing down from his position to relocate to ground level, Carter caught him halfway down, exposed on the tree trunk with nowhere to hide. 1 shot. The 8th and 9th tried coordinated fire, both engaging her last known position simultaneously. But she wasn't there anymore. She'd moved 40 meters north, found a position behind a rocky outcrop, and waited for them to expose themselves. When they did, her bullets found them with mechanical precision. 20 minutes had elapsed since the ambush began. 9 enemy snipers eliminated 1 left. The 10th was the most dangerous. Carter could tell from his discipline he hadn't fired in 5 minutes, hadn't moved, hadn't given away his position. He was waiting, patient, professional. The kind of sniper who understood that sometimes the best shot was the one you didn't take until the perfect moment. But Carter had been that sniper once. She knew the psychology, the patience, the willingness to wait hours for 1 perfect shot. And she knew the weakness. Even the most patient sniper had to breathe, had to move eventually, had to give away some sign of their presence. She set a trap. She left her pack in a position that looked like someone taking cover, arranged her jacket to suggest a human form. Then she moved 50 meters away and waited with the same patience the enemy sniper was showing. 15 minutes passed. The forest returned to its natural sounds, birds calling, wind through branches, the distant rustle of small animals. The seals stayed in cover, watching Carter work, realizing they were seeing something extraordinary. Then the 10th sniper took the bait. He fired at her decoy, a perfect shot that would have killed her if she'd actually been there. But she wasn't, and his muzzle flash gave him away. High northeast, 60 meters up in an oak tree, concealed in a hide so good she'd walked past it twice without seeing it. She fired once. The suppressed round traveled 60 meters through dappled forest light, threaded between branches, and found its target with the precision of someone who'd made this exact shot hundreds of times in terrain just like this. The 10th sniper fell, and the forest went quiet. 23 minutes had elapsed since the ambush began. 10 enemy snipers eliminated. 0 friendly casualties beyond the initial contact. The killbox had been dismantled by someone who understood forest warfare better than anyone Morrison had ever encountered. Carter descended from her position and walked back to where the team was gathered, her rifle held with casual competence that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. The SEALs stared at her like she'd just walked out of a legend. "Position's clear," she reported, her voice still carrying that professional calm. "But we need to move. If they had a radio operator, reinforcements could be inbound." Morrison stepped forward, his expression mixing awe with anger, with confusion. "Lieutenant Carter, you want to explain what the hell just happened?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I did my job, Captain. Kept your team alive so you could complete your mission." "Your job is intelligence analysis, not..." He gestured at the bodies scattered through the forest canopy. "Whatever that was. That was professional forest warfare at a level I didn't know existed." "Sometimes job descriptions are flexible," she said quietly, "and sometimes people have skills from previous assignments that prove useful." Martinez, still holding his wounded shoulder, spoke up. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 12 years. I've worked with every special operations unit we've got. What I just watched you do, that's not something you learn from a course. That's someone who's lived in forests like this, who's hunted and been hunted, who knows this environment like they were born in it." Carter was quiet for a moment. "I used to work in denied environment operations, forest specialty. 4 years in places we weren't supposed to be, doing things that don't make it into reports. I thought I was done with that life. Thought I could just analyze intelligence and file reports and never have to pull a trigger again." "But," Morrison prompted, "but watching your people die in an environment I understand better than they do." She shook her head. "I couldn't just sit there, not when I could do something about it." Daniels, nursing his wounded leg, said what everyone was thinking. "You just saved all our lives. Whatever you used to do, whatever you are now, I'm grateful you were here." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then made a decision. "The mission continues. We're 2 hours from target. Carter, you're now on point with tactical leadership. Everyone clear? If this forest has more surprises, I want the person who knows it best leading the way." The team reorganized quickly, treating wounds, redistributing ammunition, adapting to their new reality. The analyst they'd been protecting was now their best chance of survival. For the next 4 hours, Carter led them through the forest, like she had a map only she could see. She read the terrain with instincts that went beyond training, knowing which paths were safe, which areas to avoid, where enemy forces might have secondary positions. She moved them through the densest parts of the forest, where observation from above was impossible, along ridgelines that offered both speed and concealment, through stream beds that masked their noise and trail. The weapons depot was exactly where intelligence said it would be, a camouflaged structure built into a hillside, surrounded by secondary positions and guard posts. But Carter had already identified 3 guard positions that weren't on any intelligence report, using her understanding of forest warfare to predict where she would place sentries if this were her facility. 6 guards visible, Morrison whispered, watching through his scope. "Probably more inside." 8 guards total, Carter corrected quietly. 2 more in concealed positions northwest and southeast, and there's a sniper nest in that tall pine, 300 meters north. 1 shooter watching the approaches. Morrison looked where she indicated and saw nothing but tree canopy. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because that's where I'd put a sniper, and because I can see the platform they built. See how those branches have been cut and arranged? Natural branches don't grow in that pattern." She was right. When Morrison looked closer with his enhanced optics, he could just barely make out the artificial platform that Carter had spotted immediately. The team eliminated the sentries with coordinated precision, Carter taking the sniper with a shot that threaded through branches at 300 meters like the trees weren't even there. They secured the depot, confirmed the presence of anti-aircraft missiles, and called in coordinates for the airstrike from a radio they recovered from the facility. By the time they extracted back to the forward operating base 18 hours later, the story had already begun to spread. The intelligence analyst who'd saved an entire SEAL team by becoming the most effective forest warrior anyone had ever seen. The quiet woman who'd transformed into a ghost in the trees, hunting enemy snipers through terrain that should have made it impossible. In the debriefing, Morrison was careful with his words. "We encountered hostile sniper positions in the forest. An attached analyst, Lieutenant Carter, proved to have specialized knowledge of forest operations that was critical to mission success. 10 enemy combatants were neutralized, minimal friendly casualties, mission accomplished. But the battalion commander wasn't fooled. Colonel Hayes had been doing this too long not to read between lines. After the official debrief, he called Carter into his office alone. "Lieutenant," he said, studying her personnel file on his computer screen, "your record has more redacted sections than I've ever seen. Your previous assignments are classified at levels I don't even have access to. But after hearing Morrison's report and talking to his team, I have a pretty good idea what you used to do." "Sir, I'm not authorized to—" "I'm not asking you to confirm anything," Hayes interrupted. "I'm just going to say this. We've got more operations planned in this forest. Dangerous operations. And I could really use someone with your particular expertise helping to plan them, someone who understands what we're up against out there." Carter considered this carefully. She'd spent 6 months trying to convince herself she was done with that life, done being a weapon, done being the person who solved problems by being better at violence than anyone else. But she'd also just spent 23 minutes remembering what it felt like to be exceptional at something that mattered, something that saved lives. "I have conditions," she finally said. Hayes smiled slightly. "I'm listening. I maintain my analysis role as primary duty, but for operations in forest environments, where my experience is relevant, I'll provide tactical consultation and participate when necessary on my terms." "Acceptable. And no one needs to know the details of my previous work. My cover stays intact." "Also acceptable. Welcome to the team, Lieutenant, the real team this time." Over the next year, Carter participated in 15 operations in that forest. She planned them, led them when necessary, and used her knowledge of the terrain to keep casualties to near zero. The SEALs who worked with her developed an almost superstitious respect for her abilities. The woman who could read forests like other people read books, who moved through canopies like other people walked across rooms, who could find enemies that were invisible to everyone else. She never enjoyed it. Every shot she took, every enemy she eliminated, carried weight that kept her awake some nights, but she'd made peace with what she was, someone who could do hard things in dark places so that other people could live safely in the light. The wolf protecting the sheep. The guardian no one wanted to think about but everyone needed. And in the forests where light barely penetrated and danger lurked in every shadow, that was exactly what made the difference between teams coming home alive and families receiving death notifications. Lieutenant Lydia Carter had tried to stop being a weapon. She'd learned instead to be a weapon that chose carefully when and how to be used. And in a world that sometimes needed someone who could hunt the hunters through impossible terrain, that wisdom saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. 23 minutes. 10 enemy snipers. One woman who remembered what she was when it mattered most. The forest remembered too, and the enemies who learned about the ghost in the canopy, the ones who survived to tell the story, gave that forest a wide berth from then on, because some predators you could see coming. But the most dangerous ones were invisible until the moment they struck. And by then, it was already too late. 3 months after that mission, Carter found herself in Colonel Hayes's office again. This time, Captain Morrison was there too, along with 2 officers she didn't recognize, both wearing civilian clothes that screamed, "Intelligence Community." "Lieutenant Carter," Hayes began, "these gentlemen have a proposition for you. They've been following your work." The older of the 2 civilians spoke. "We represent a joint task force that operates in denied environments worldwide. We've reviewed your record, the real one, not the sanitized version. We'd like to offer you a position leading forest warfare training for special operations personnel. You'd teach them what you know, help them survive in environments like the one where you saved Morrison's team." Carter considered this. Teaching meant fewer triggers pulled, fewer faces in her scope, fewer nights lying awake remembering the weight of decisions made in milliseconds. But it also meant her knowledge could save lives she'd never meet, in places she'd never see. "I'll do it," she said, "but I have one condition." "Name it." "When teams I've trained go into the field, I go with them as Overwatch, just in case." The civilian smiled. "We were hoping you'd say that." "Welcome aboard, Lieutenant. Let's teach the next generation how to own the forest instead of dying in it." And so Lydia Carter found her purpose, not as a weapon, not as an analyst, but as both. The protector who could think and shoot, teach and execute, save lives through knowledge and, when necessary, through precisely placed bullets that kept good people breathing. The forest was her classroom now. And her students learned from the best, the ghost who'd turned a massacre into a legend in 23 minutes of perfect, terrible efficiency. She established a training program that became legendary in special operations circles. Carter's Crucible, they called it, 3 weeks in dense forest learning to move, hide, hunt, and survive in environments that had killed countless operators before her students learned to read terrain the way she did, to see what forests tried to hide, to become part of the environment instead of fighting against it. But more importantly, they learned the mindset. the patience, the willingness to wait hours for the right moment, the discipline to take only shots that mattered, the wisdom to know when violence was necessary and when it wasn't. Morrison attended her first training course as an observer. Watching her teach, he finally understood what made her exceptional. It wasn't just her skills with a rifle or her ability to move through canopies. It was the way she understood the complete picture: tactics, psychology, terrain, weather, enemy behavior patterns, and how all of it interconnected in ways most people never saw. She doesn't just teach shooting, he told Hayes afterward. She teaches people how to think like the forest itself, how to become something that belongs there instead of something that's invading it. That's why she's so effective. Over the years, hundreds of operators passed through Carter's program. Many of them owed their lives to lessons she'd taught: how to spot sniper hides that looked like natural formations, how to move through canopies without announcing your presence, how to read the forest's mood and adapt accordingly. And when her students faced situations like the one that had nearly killed Morrison's team, they survived. They thrived. Because they'd learned from someone who'd mastered an environment most people would never understand. Lieutenant Lydia Carter never sought recognition, never wanted medals or promotions or public acknowledgement. She just wanted to keep good people alive in dangerous places. And in that quiet, unglamorous mission, she succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The ghost in the canopy, the teacher in the forest, the weapon that chose carefully when to be used. 23 minutes had made her a legend, but the years that followed proved she was something more important than legendary. She was necessary. She established a training program that became legendary in special operations circles. Carter's Crucible, they called it. 3 weeks in dense forest learning to move, hide, hunt, and survive in environments that had killed countless operators before her students learned to read terrain the way she did, to see what forests tried to hide, to become part of the environment instead of fighting against it. But more importantly, they learned the mindset, the patience, the willingness to wait hours for the right moment, the discipline to take only shots that mattered, the wisdom to know when violence was necessary and when it wasn't. Morrison attended her first training course as an observer. Watching her teach, he finally understood what made her exceptional. It wasn't just her skills with a rifle or her ability to move through canopies. It was the way she understood the complete picture: tactics, psychology, terrain, weather, enemy behavior patterns, and how all of it interconnected in ways most people never saw. She doesn't just teach shooting, he told Hayes afterward. She teaches people how to think like the forest itself, how to become something that belongs there instead of something that's invading it. That's why she's so effective. Over the years, hundreds of operators passed through Carter's program. Many of them owed their lives to lessons she'd taught: how to spot sniper hides that looked like natural formations, how to move through canopies without announcing your presence, how to read the forest's mood and adapt accordingly. And when her students faced situations like the one that had nearly killed Morrison's team, they survived. They thrived. Because they'd learned from someone who'd mastered an environment most people would never understand. On a crisp autumn morning 5 years after that fateful mission, Carter stood at the forest's edge with her latest class of operators. They watched her with the same reverence that Morrison's team had developed, the respect born from knowing she could do things they couldn't imagine. The forest isn't your enemy, she told them, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd proven every word she spoke. It's your ally. If you know how to listen to it today, you'll learn that language, and that language will save your life someday. She led them into the canopy, and the forest swallowed them like it had swallowed her so many times before. But this time, she was teaching others to survive in it, to master it, to become the predators instead of the prey. Lieutenant Lydia Carter never sought recognition, never wanted medals or promotions or public acknowledgement. She just wanted to keep good people alive in dangerous places. And in that quiet, unglamorous mission, she succeeded beyond anyone's expectations: the ghost in the canopy, the teacher in the forest, the weapon that chose carefully when to be used. 23 minutes had made her a legend. But the years that followed proved she was something more important than legendary. She was necessary. And in a world where forests still hid dangers and good people still needed protecting, that necessity would never fade. The wolf protecting the sheep, forever watchful, forever ready, forever teaching the next generation how to survive in shadows where light barely reached and death waited in the branches above. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of brave women in uniform.